There is a question that can change the direction of a person's life. Not what you do, not how much you earn, not even what you have achieved, but who do you think and believe you are? Because what you believe consistently will actually affect how you act consistently also. Matthew, the tax collector, has a story about Jesus and his disciples. It's a fascinating story. Jesus one day was asking his disciples, "Who do men think I am?" They began to give him different public opinions. Some say you're John the Baptist, others say you are Elijah, others say you're Jeremiah, and some other prophets. Then Jesus personalized the question and said, "Who do you think I am?" Now the conversation left public perception and opinion to self and personal perception. Then Peter rose up and said, "You are Christ, the Son of the living God." But watch what happened later, or what happened next. Jesus doesn't affirm Peter's answer. What he actually did was that he began to reveal something about Peter. Now, he tells him the essence of his life and what he's going to do because of this identification that he just did. Now, the hidden truth inside that conversation is a powerful principle that identity produces function. So, most times identity will precede function. You don't truly understand who you are until that understanding begins to influence what you do. Now let's bring it home a bit. If I asked you now, who are you? You will begin to say things like your name, your profession, your marital status, your nationality, your achievements, and all those things. But those things just describe an aspect of who you are. But they don't necessarily define you, because there are people who have achieved a lot but still don't know who they are. There are some persons who lost their job and suddenly they believe that they've lost themselves. Others lost a relationship and they begin to ask themselves, now that I'm no longer in this relationship, how can I be myself without this person? Some other people failed an exam and they concluded in their head, maybe I am not intelligent. A person was repeatedly criticized when they were a child. And then you will see that the person eventually begins to live as though those criticisms were facts. This is where perception becomes very powerful. There are two major kinds of perception. The first one is the public perception. What people think about you, your reputation, your image, what people observe about you. And then there is the other one that is called the self-perception. What you believe about yourself. And here is the dangerous part of this. People can misunderstand you, but you can also misunderstand yourself. You can be gifted and still think that you are ordinary. You can actually have a lot of capabilities but still believe you are incapable. You can have a lot of leadership capacity and qualities and you still keep acting and behaving like a follower. You can have something very valuable to contribute and you spend your entire life waiting for someone else to come and validate you. So here is something that is very interesting and a question that you could be asking. If perception of myself can influence how I function, where does perception come from? That's a very key question. Let me start by telling you that nobody arrives this world fully developed with the interpretation of who they are. We learn, we absorb, we experience, we observe. The family then begins to teach us. Culture begins to tell us some more things. Then our friends begin to influence us. Teachers begin to influence us. We get into relationships and then we get more influenced. Then success begins to tell us some things. Failure begins to tell us other things. When we are praised, we hear some other things. When we are rejected, we hear other things from the people rejecting us. Now, those repeated words will become repeated beliefs. Imagine a child who, while growing up, was always told that you are troublesome. That child will grow up and will stop thinking that Those are choices, and begin to think, maybe I'm a bad person. That's a huge difference. You know why? Because when he thinks that he's making bad choices, that describes his behavior. But when he begins to feel that maybe this is who I am, that begins to create an identity. And eventually, the person begins to behave consistent with that identity that he has accepted. That is how some people live their lives, and because of that, they don't actually have habits. What they have is identity supported habits. So they don't say things like, I struggle with discipline. They say, I am just not a disciplined person, personalizing it and making it the identity. Then some other persons don't say things like, I am learning how to communicate better. Instead, they say, that is just who I am. Some other persons who have a bad attitude will not say, I'm making bad choices. They will tell you, I'm not just a nice person. And once behavior becomes identity, whenever you want to change that behavior, it will be as if you're losing who you are. Now, there is even a deeper question. Before people told you who you are, before you began to have experiences that labeled you, and before life began to give you suggestions of who you are, who were you designed to be? There is an original identity, ladies and gentlemen. Because at the beginning of creation, there is an interesting story of how God made man. God actually said that he wants to make man in his own image and in his own likeness. Then David the psalmist came out and said it in a better way and said that, don't you know that you are a God? That's an extraordinary term to be used for a human being. So what it means is that before society named you, before failure named you, before your profession named you, before your achievements gave you a label, there is an original design. That's why one of the important questions you must ask yourself in life is not, who have I become? It's actually, who am I designed to be? Because sometimes what you call your personality is just conditioning. Sometimes what you call your weakness is just your untrained capacity. And then sometimes what you call your identity is simply the story that you have repeated to yourself long enough that you no longer question that story. And discovering yourself isn't about inventing a completely new you. No. Sometimes it's just about removing everything that we are never supposed to be part of what defines you in the first place. So let's get practical with this a bit. Suppose you discover that you're meant to be a teacher. What are you meant to do? To teach. If you discover that you're a leader, what are you meant to do? Lead. If you discover that you're a builder, then build. If you see that you're a problem solver, then solve the problem. If you see yourself as a communicator, communicate. Identity that never produces function remains a beautiful idea. And this is where many people get stuck. They know that they have a passion about something good. They are good at something very spectacular and special. They know and they believe that they are called to do something that is specific, but they don't do anything about it and they don't do anything with it. They have an identity without expression. But identity becomes powerful when it is translated into responsibility. I want you to take note of this. Function is identity expressed through responsibility. I'll say that again. Function is identity expressed through responsibility. And once identity begins to produce function, the next thing that happens is very beautiful. The next thing that happens is that mastery is developed, because you don't actually develop mastery once. What happens? You actually develop mastery by trying things again and again and again. For example, no one becomes brave just because they made one decision, or becomes courageous because of one decision. Nobody will say, I've given one speech, so now I am a super communicator. Nobody will say, I am a successful entrepreneur because I made one sale. Nobody will say, I worked out only once and now I'm very, very fit. You cannot say, I just gave an act of kindness and that is my character. No. What actually defines your character is repetition. So when you repeatedly perform a function, you develop capacity. When a teacher teaches, what happens? He or she becomes a better teacher. When a leader leads, the person develops more leadership capacity. When an entrepreneur solves a problem, then he becomes better at solving problems. When a communicator communicates, then they become more effective communicators. So let me give you a framework to this. The framework is that it starts with identity. That is who you are. Then it goes to function. That is who that identity requires you to act like. Then it goes to consistency, the repetition of that function that your identity has made you to begin to act. Then it goes to growth, because when you consistently act according to the identity you have, the natural thing that follows is growth. Now, this is a beautiful part. Your growth will continuously increase your capacity and introduce you to a higher level. So it makes it a cycle. So you discover about who you are, then you function from that understanding, and then you begin to practice it consistently and you grow. Your growth will now reveal another level of who you are meant to be. Then the cycle continues like that over and over again. So perhaps the question isn't merely who do you say you are? The question should actually be, does the way I live my life today agree with who I say I am? Because if you say you are a leader, then who are you leading? If you say you are a builder, question is, what are you building? If you say you are a disciplined person, then show me your daily routine, because that will reveal if you're a disciplined person or not. If you say you are a person of integrity, the question is, what do you do when nobody is watching you? Because eventually, identity will demand evidence. So what are you meant to do with this information? Today, when you get back, don't just ask yourself, who am I? Ask yourself 3 deeper questions. First one is, who do I believe I am? And then go further to also interrogate yourself and say, who should that identity that I found out begin to produce? What kind of person should that identity begin to produce? And then you should also ask yourself, what do I need to start doing consistently to become better at what and who I am? Don't spend your life trying to become someone else. No. Discover who you were designed to be. Give that identity a useful function. Then practice it faithfully and consistently over a period of time. And then allow growth to introduce you to the next person that you are becoming. That is when the food chain is complete. That you go from identity to functioning. From functioning consistently, you grow into a different identity, then you function in it consistently, you grow into the next one. Like that, it continues. And perhaps that's the real answer to that question. Who do you think or say you are? Because eventually your life will answer that question for you by the function that you perform consistently, and then by the growth that comes into your life. This is Ace with Okwi, the Wealth Maestro. Follow me on all social media platforms at OKWW Maestro as we continue this discussion, because all we want to do is to give ourselves a clear path of excellence by, first of all, finding our identity and then functioning consistently in it and achieving the growth that it has for us. God bless you.